This video is brought to you courtesy of the popular and free-to-play multiplayer game Enlisted. If you're a gamer, you know that historical shooters have come back into vogue in the last 4 or 5 years, and Enlisted, which was launched in 2021, is becoming one of the most popular games in the space. It's got a strong focus on historical accuracy while still keeping gameplay dynamic and fast-paced. Personally, I like games in this genre as they build mechanics around history, and that's exactly what Enlisted does. You can play distinct historical campaigns like the Invasion of Normandy or the Battle for Moscow. Each campaign has unique maps, troops, weapons, and all kinds of various historic details to unlock and play with. Enlisted has lots of elements from other shooters that you probably enjoy, like large-scale combat zones with vehicles and specialized weapons, but it also has some cool elements that are totally unique, like the ability to construct fortifications to assist your team in real time on the battlefield. And naturally, there's full customization of your soldier, so you can take your preferred style of fighter into battle. Naturally, Enlisted is available on PC, as well as both Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, as well as Xbox One and PS4, and everything is fully optimized for cross-platform support. So, there's lots of ways that you can join the battle. And remember, it's free to play. Go to enlisted.link/Into the Shadows Enlisted to get started. So there's a link below because that's complicated. And as a special treat for you guys, following that link in the description below will get you 3 days of premium play for free, plus several orders for troops and weapons. Very cool. Go and join Enlisted today. And now today's video. In 2019, a paper was published about a 56-year-old man who could feel a full-size unicorn horn growing out of his forehead. Rather than being sectioned and prescribed some pretty strong antipsychotics, he underwent a brain scan, which showed reduced blood flow in his visual primary cortex. He wasn't suffering from psychosis, but rather from Alice in Wonderland syndrome. This is a phenomenon where abnormalities in the brain cause a patient's world or body to become distorted. In the early 1900s, physicians began taking note of a strange symptom: they couldn't see themselves. One doctor reported epileptic patients perceiving objects to be twice their size. Another had a seizure sufferer claiming everything looks bigger, and World War I and World War II soldiers with occipital lesions had been experiencing similar hallucinations. In 1933, psychiatrist Stanley Coleman presented a similar case, but this time, instead of objects in the world becoming distorted, his schizophrenic patient was feeling her own body growing or shrinking. In 1952, an American neurologist, Caro Lippman, began seeing the same thing in his migraine patients and published the first paper focused solely on the syndrome, certain hallucinations peculiar to migraine. One particular patient who was experiencing bilious headaches, otherwise known as migraines, described her experience as well. She said, "I get all tired out from pulling my head down from the ceiling. I've been pulling it down all night long. On the second day of this attack, a bad one, my head fell into a deep hole under the head of the bed. It was a very deep hole." Each doctor had spotted that their patient was suffering from the anonymous condition, but no one actually bothered to name it. Not even after Stanley Coleman quoted his schizophrenia patient as feeling like Alice in Wonderland. Finally, in 1955, British psychiatrist J. Todd sorted things out with his paper, The Syndrome of Alice in Wonderland. In it, he coined the term not only for the patient in Coleman's paper, but also for the fact that he believed Lewis Carroll, the author of Alice in Wonderland, to have suffered from the condition himself. That's right, contrary to the popular belief that Carroll was off his head when he was writing about mysterious potions, hookah-huffing caterpillars and magic mushrooms, he was most likely actually sober. Aside from a few medicinal uses of laudanum, Carroll's diaries give no indication that he was a recreational drug user. Plus, LSD, the drug people claim provides a trip most similar to Alice's journey down the rabbit hole, wouldn't be invented for another 73 years. What Carroll did mention in his diaries, however, were migraines, some so severe that he reported seeing moving fortifications, an optical illusion suffered by many Alice in Wonderland syndrome AIWS sufferers. Plus, almost every single symptom of the syndrome was experienced by Alice in the book. She shrank, she grew, she felt like she was falling, time was distorted, and she hallucinated a lot. The most famous syndrome of AIWS is, of course, the feeling of growing or shrinking. Carroll told of Alice waving goodbye to her feet and growing enough to touch the ceiling. Todd's 1955 paper referenced a 39-year-old woman who'd suddenly feel as if she'd grown to fill a room, a 40-year-old man who felt 8 foot tall sometimes and 3 foot high at others, and a 24-year-old woman who'd feel her feet grow a yard long. But most cases are not this dramatic. Often sufferers, most of whom are children, simply describe a strange feeling of themselves shrinking or growing as they lay in bed, about to fall asleep. A sensation that's gone by morning and has no impact on their day-to-day lives. Now, this is the point where a lot of you might go, wait a minute, hang on a second, I had that as a kid. And, well, you're probably right. The average age of onset is 6 years old, and people mostly outgrow it by the age of 20. It's hugely underreported, as children don't tend to tell their parents, mostly because it's so hard to describe, and then it just goes away on its own. The size distortions don't always have to be isolated to the sufferer's body either. Patients can experience macropsia, where objects appear larger, and micropsia, where objects appear to be smaller instead. This can be disorientating if you're trying to drive and the road suddenly shrinks, or terrifying, like in the case of one 19-year-old who frequently saw her cat grow to be the size of a tiger. Sometimes micropsia can be experienced in a fun combo with hallucinations. This allows the patient to see swarms of tiny people or animals that are not really there. This sounds quite sweet, unless, of course, you're the 63-year-old man in India who was frequently attacked by a horde of 200 finger-sized people. He sought help as he distressed his family when he yelled out in terror each time. If this sounds to you like something from Gulliver's Travels, well, you're not the first to have thought that. The phenomenon has actually been named Lilliputian hallucinations after the land of Lilliput, where Gulliver was captured by the tiny inhabitants. Distance can become incredibly distorted too, either with objects seeming further away, telopsia, or closer, palopsia, than they really are. This can result in corridors looking incredibly long, your own feet appearing out of reach, or the walls closing in on you. Depersonalization or derealization is another symptom often reported. This is a feeling of being disconnected from the body, and patients often describe watching themselves from above or through a window. One of Todd's first patients, a 24-year-old woman, would feel her head divide in two. One half, the half she felt contained her mind, would break off and float behind her right shoulder and watch the rest of herself. But the common symptoms include time distortions, an inaccurate sense of velocity, and hearing disturbances that can cause a change in pitch or volume. Again, a bit weird if you're in bed at night, but totally paralyzing if you're trying to drive or cross a road. There are three categories of AIWS, types A, B, and C. Type A refers to symptoms that are purely somesthetic, which means related to bodily sensation. This is your classic feeling as if you're growing to fill the room. Although it's the most famous, as it's a big theme in the books, it's actually the least common type. Type B involves the visual distortion of your surroundings. This is where objects grow, shrink, appear closer or further away, or even, in the case of metamorphosia, change shape. This is the most common type that's experienced by children. Type C is most common in adults and is simply a combination of both types A and B. Sufferers of this one experience what must be an incredibly disconcerting distortion of both their bodies and their surroundings. It's maybe like getting high, donning a fat suit, and then trying to make your way through a funhouse. Diagnosing the syndrome is extremely tricky, as symptoms can be so varied and there's no established diagnostic criteria. AIWS isn't a specific physiological condition that can be observed. It's a change in the patient's perception. Not only is this difficult to nail down in the first place, but it has the added complication that it's also a symptom of a number of psychiatric conditions. Mistaking AIWS for psychosis could result in missing a brain bleed or infection, which could be fatal. In the books, Alice's growth and shrinking were caused by her questionable decisions to consume anything with an eat me or drink me label. In reality, it's just not that easy to figure out, unless, that is, you consume something that had LSD written on it. The problem is that the majority of episodes only last between 5 and 15 minutes. This is great if you want to get through a date without batting imaginary attackers away from your plate, but not so great if you're a neurologist trying to figure out what's causing a patient's symptoms. Luckily, there have been a few occasions where doctors have managed to trigger an event while the patient was inside a scanner. One patient, 12-year-old Anna Reiser, found that her Alice episodes only seemed to occur when she was concentrating hard on a page of piano music. Neurologists got her to concentrate on a black and white checkerboard in the scanning room in an attempt to replicate a trigger, and they managed to capture a whole image of a hallucinating brain. The results showed two areas of the brain lit up with abnormal blood flow. These were the parts that process texture, size, and shape. This was a great leap forward. but only proved what was already obvious to the neurologists and, well, anybody, really. Abnormal perception of size and shape was caused by abnormal activity in the part of the brain responsible for processing size and shape. Astonishing stuff. Now, unfortunately for ALS sufferers, this means that anything that messes with the blood or electrical signals in the brain could be causing the issues, and, well, that's a really long list of things. By far the most common condition on the list is migraines, which occurred for 27.1% of cases. Unfortunately, the causes of the migraines themselves are often unknown, and attacks are sometimes unavoidable. Viruses are another common cause of the disorder. Viral encephalitis caused by Epstein-Barr is the most common culprit, accounting for 15.7% of Wonderland cases. But other viruses like flu and Zika have triggered it too. One example is a teenager who was suffering from telopsia and couldn't drink water as the glass just kept moving away from her mouth. After taking her history, doctors discovered that she'd had a Zika virus infection and accompanying high fever just 10 days before. Brain bleeds and lesions count for another 7.8% of attacks. For example, an 80-year-old woman in Sao Paulo recently visited her doctor after she became concerned that her son's arm was growing and his hand was shrinking. Following a quick check of her son's limbs and an MRI, doctors discovered that she was suffering from a brain hemorrhage. Fortunately, once the bleeding resolved, her hallucinations disappeared. Less common causes include medical drugs, side effects, recreational drugs, psychiatric disorders, epilepsy, and peripheral nervous system disease. However, a staggering 20% of patients have never found a reason for why they have Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Between 1955 and 2015, only 169 cases of AIWS were reported in the literature. This might indicate that it's an extremely rare condition, and if you're one of the childhood sufferers, that you're pretty special. However, it's likely that the majority of cases go unreported. One study in Japan found that out of 3,224 adolescents, 6.5% of boys and 7.3% of girls had experienced either micro or macropsia at some point. However, even this could be an underrepresentation, with some doctors suggesting the real percentage might be as high as 30%. The reason for the discrepancy is that people aren't coming forward with their symptoms. Brazilian neurologist Dr. Fragaso believes people in her area don't report their experiences to doctors as they believe it to be spiritual rather than a medical issue. She suffered from the syndrome herself as a child. Her hands would appear to grow larger and she'd attempt to hide them in her pockets despite being sure that they wouldn't fit. She never told an adult about this. Children, those who are afraid of being labeled crazy, and those who only experience minor symptoms are also unlikely to report for obvious reasons. It's not like anyone who's felt their room get a little larger or themselves get a little smaller for a few moments at night is going to be in a rush to book a doctor's appointment. Finally, most adults who experienced the phenomenon as a kid never even realized it as a thing until they saw Hugh Laurie diagnose it in an episode of House. Or maybe you found out about it today, watching this very video. In which case, you're welcome. If you're someone who experienced Alice in Wonderland syndrome as a child and have already outgrown it, good news, it's extremely unlikely it was anything sinister. Don't go booking any brain scans in the hunt for an ancient aneurysm. Whatever triggered it has resolved itself. If, however, you've had it since you were a child and it's not gone away, got less good news. There's no treatment for AIWS, but don't panic. If you can treat the underlying cause, the distortions should subside on their own. So, AIWS triggered by a migraine can be treated by taking medication or following a migraine reduction diet, and anti-epileptics, antivirals, or antibiotics will help prevent attacks brought on by epilepsy, viruses, or infection. Unfortunately, if you don't know or can't remove the root cause, there's not much anyone can do. There's not a huge amount of research into AIWS or urgency in finding a cure for the condition, as doctors consider it fairly benign. This is a source of huge frustration for the people who live and struggle with it daily, as symptoms aren't always minor. One patient reports having to live with intense color-based hallucinations where her mother's head will suddenly turn blue or purple stripes will appear on her arms. Another patient, Rick Helmsley, described his life as like living through a fisheye lens. He struggles to correctly perceive the ground and therefore finds it hard to leave the house. Walking and crossing the road aren't just difficult, they're dangerous for him. He says until more work is done and a cure is found, he and others like him will be trapped in their own wonderlands. Thanks again to Enlisted for sponsoring today's video. Remember, you can go to enlisted.link/Into the Shadows Enlisted to start playing their free MMO shooter with 3 days of premium play and some bonus troops and weapons. Go check them out, and thank you for watching.